The woman slammed the bottle on the counter, her voice sharp enough to make the entire store fall silent. So now you're accusing me? What proof do you have? Customers nearby started whispering. Some watched curiously, others simply wanted the scene to end so they could pay and leave. Jasmine stood behind the register, shoulders tense, fingers gripping the counter so tightly the knuckles had turned white. I really did see it, she said quietly. Her voice wasn't loud, but there was a stubborn steadiness in it. The woman scoffed loudly. You people are unbelievable. Just because something's open you try to push the bill onto customers. At that moment I stepped forward. I had been standing near the drink refrigerator the entire time, holding a cup of coffee and watching the argument unfold. I saw it too, I said calmly. Both of them turned toward me. The woman's expression stiffened. Saw what? You opened the bottle. I placed my coffee on the counter. Right there by the fridge. For a moment she looked stunned, clearly not expecting someone to interfere. Then she quickly changed her tone, trying to laugh it off. Young man, you must be mistaken. I'm not, I replied. You twisted the cap and took a sip before walking over here. Several people in line nodded quietly, sensing what had happened. The woman's confidence started to crumble. Seeing the situation turn against her, she suddenly grabbed the bottle and threw a few bills onto the counter. Fine. It's just a drink anyway. She snatched her bag and stormed out of the store, muttering angrily as the door slammed behind her. Silence lingered for a few seconds. Jasmine stood there frozen, as if the tension had drained all the strength from her body. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were still wet but filled with relief. Thank you, she said softly. Her voice was gentle, almost shy. I shrugged. I was just telling the truth. She wiped the corner of her eye and gave a small embarrassed smile. In that moment, under the pale morning sunlight filtering through the glass windows, she looked incredibly fragile. That was the first time I saw Jasmine. And for some reason, the image of that stubborn girl standing alone behind the counter stayed in my mind long after I walked out of the store. At the time, I had no idea that the girl who looked so helpless that morning would eventually become the person I would spend 3 years chasing, and the bride who would later destroy my life. For a few seconds the entire hall fell into complete silence. The guests looked at each other in confusion, unsure if they had misheard. Even the officiant froze with the microphone still raised in his hand. Jasmine stared at me as if the world beneath her feet had suddenly disappeared. Philip, what did you just say? Her voice trembled, barely louder than a whisper. I looked at her calmly. I said I don't agree. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Relatives began whispering, some shocked, others clearly trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Jasmine's fingers tightened around the bouquet she was holding. Is this some kind of joke? She asked weakly. Her smile was still there, but it was trembling at the edges. I shook my head slowly. No. The single word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Her face went pale. You can't be serious, she said quickly, stepping closer to me. Philip, everyone is here. Our families are here. The ceremony already started. Her voice grew more frantic with each sentence. If you're upset about something we can talk about it later, okay? We can talk after the wedding. I didn't answer immediately. Instead I glanced toward the entrance of the hall. Among the crowd stood a man in a dark jacket, his expression tense as he watched the stage. The same man who had been inside the makeup room earlier. Our eyes met for a brief moment. Then I looked back at Jasmine. You should ask yourself that question, I said quietly. Her breathing became uneven. I don't understand what you mean. Of course she understood. She just didn't expect me to know. I took a slow breath and looked around the hall filled with guests who had come to witness what should have been a joyful wedding. My answer hasn't changed, I continued calmly. This marriage won't happen. The whispers in the audience grew louder. Jasmine suddenly grabbed my arm. Philip, stop this, she pleaded, her voice shaking. Whatever I did wrong, I'll apologize. But don't do this here. Please. Her eyes were already turning red again. If this had happened in my previous life, that expression alone would have shattered my resolve instantly. I would have comforted her, apologized, and convinced myself everything was fine. But now, watching her cry felt strangely distant. Like watching a scene from someone else's story. You don't need to apologize to me, I said. Her grip loosened slightly. A small flicker of hope appeared in her eyes. But the next sentence erased it completely. You should apologize to yourself. She stared at me blankly. What? I finally spoke the word she feared most. You were in the makeup room 20 minutes ago. Her entire body stiffened. For a moment she looked like someone who had been struck by lightning. I told you, she said quickly, forcing a shaky laugh. I was fixing my makeup. I looked at her quietly. Were you fixing it, I asked softly, or crying in someone's arms? Her pupils shrank. The color drained from her face so quickly it was almost visible. For the first time since the ceremony began, true panic appeared in her eyes. We're not children playing games with each other's feelings. If you still had someone else in your heart, you could have told me at any time. We could have ended things quietly, like two adults who once cared about each other. But what you did today was different. You let me stand here in front of everyone, I continued calmly, my voice echoing through the silent hall. You let our families gather, let the ceremony begin, while you were still tangled in another man's arms. Jasmine shook her head desperately. No, that's not what happened. Her voice cracked. I only went to talk to him. I just wanted closure. I swear I didn't mean anything else. Her explanation sounded rushed, almost panicked, like someone trying to plug a hole in a sinking boat. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I glanced toward Berlin. He was still being held by the groomsmen, his face dark with anger. The moment our eyes met, the hostility in his expression didn't fade at all. If anything, it grew sharper. That was when I understood something very clearly. Some people never truly leave each other. They only pretend to. I looked back at Jasmine. You say it meant nothing, I said quietly. Then tell everyone here, why were you crying in his arms? Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And why, I added, did you look more afraid of losing him than losing me? The question struck her harder than any accusation. Her body swayed slightly under the bright stage lights. For 5 years I had watched every change in her expression. I knew the smallest shift in her eyes, the faintest tremble in her voice. Right now, what I saw was not innocence. It was guilt. The hall remained deathly quiet. Guests who had arrived expecting to witness a wedding were now watching something else entirely, a relationship collapsing in front of them. Jasmine finally spoke again, her voice trembling. Philip, please don't do this. Tears rolled down her cheeks uncontrollably. We've been together for 5 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I looked at her steadily. Of course it does. For a brief moment, relief flashed across her face. But then I finished the sentence. That's exactly why I won't pretend nothing happened. Her expression froze. You once asked me, I said slowly, what the one thing was that I could never forgive. Her breathing grew uneven. I had told her the answer many times before. Loyalty. Not money. Not arguments. Not pride. Just loyalty. If you had chosen him before today, I continued calmly, I would have respected that choice. My voice softened slightly. But you didn't. Instead, she tried to keep both. And in doing so, she lost everything. Jasmine suddenly dropped the bouquet in her hands. The flowers scattered across the stage as she stepped closer to me, desperation filling her eyes. I choose you, she said quickly. I choose you, Philip. I swear. Her voice broke. I'll cut him off completely. I'll never see him again. Please, just give me one more chance. Behind her, Berlin's face turned pale with disbelief. The hall fell silent again. Everyone was waiting for my answer. I looked at Jasmine for a long moment. 5 years of memories passed through my mind like distant echoes. The mornings we had breakfast together. The late-night calls. The promises about the future. All of it felt strangely far away now. Finally, I spoke. Jasmine. My voice was calm, almost gentle. You're not choosing me. She stared at me, confused. You're choosing the version of me who would forgive anything. I shook my head slowly. But that person, I paused for a moment. Died once already. You're mistaken, I said quietly. It's not that I don't want you. Jasmine's eyes instantly lit up with fragile hope, as if she had caught the only piece of driftwood in a storm. But I continued calmly. It's that I no longer need you. The words struck harder than any slap. Her expression froze, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the strength. For 5 years she had been the center of my world. Everything I did revolved around her. If she was upset, I would stay up all night trying to comfort her. If she wanted something, I would find a way to make it happen. I had once believed that loving someone meant giving them everything without hesitation. But now I understood something I hadn't before. Love without dignity eventually turns into something pitiful. Jasmine shook her head desperately. No. Philip, please don't say that. Her voice broke as she tried to step closer again. I never meant to hurt you. I swear I didn't. Behind her, Berlin was slowly getting back on his feet, his face bruised and his suit wrinkled from the fight. Yet even then, his eyes remained locked on Jasmine. Not on me. On her. The strange thing was, for the first time, I didn't feel angry at him. In a way, he had simply taken back something that had never truly belonged to me. Jasmine grabbed the edge of my sleeve, tears falling uncontrollably. 5 years, she whispered. Philip, we were together for 5 years. I gently removed her fingers from my arm. Yes. My tone was calm. And those 5 years were real. Her shoulders trembled. Then why are you treating me like this? I looked at her for a moment before answering. Because those 5 years were real to me. The difference hung silently between us. To her, those years had been something that could still be replaced, reconsidered, or balanced against someone else. To me, they had been everything. That was why betrayal felt so absolute. Around us the hall was still filled with stunned guests. No one seemed eager to leave, as if everyone had become trapped inside a story that had spiraled out of control. I glanced at the wedding stage one last time. The flowers, the lights, the decorations, everything had been prepared carefully months in advance. Jasmine had once excitedly chosen every detail herself. Now the entire scene felt strangely meaningless. I picked up the microphone again. "Thank you all for coming today," I said calmly to the crowd. "I'm sorry the celebration turned into something unpleasant." A few guests shifted awkwardly in their seats. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked curious. But none of it mattered anymore. I placed the microphone back on the stand. Then I turned and began walking toward the exit of the hall. Behind me I could hear Jasmine calling my name. "Philip! Wait!" Her voice cracked with desperation. But this time I didn't stop. Not even once. Because in my previous life, that hesitation had cost me everything. The hotel lobby was quiet compared to the chaos inside the hall. My friends walked beside me, some still angry, some still in disbelief. One of them kept muttering under his breath about how easily I had let things end. But strangely enough, my mind felt lighter than it had in years. 5 years of chasing someone, and the moment it ended, the weight disappeared. Outside the hotel, the evening sky was slowly turning orange. Cars moved past the entrance while guests who had left the ceremony earlier were still discussing what had happened. I loosened the collar of my shirt and finally let out a long breath. One of my closest friends nudged my shoulder. "Are you really okay?" I thought about it for a moment. "Yeah," I said simply. He looked unconvinced. "Man, you were about to get married. Anyone else would be losing their mind right now." I smiled faintly. Maybe the old me would have. But the version of me who had died once already didn't feel the same anymore. Another friend spoke up from behind us. "So what now?" "Now?" I repeated. "For the first time in years you're single again. No wedding. No fiancé. No future in-laws asking you for favors." The group chuckled lightly. I thought about his question seriously. For a long time, every plan in my life had revolved around Jasmine. Where to live. How to arrange my career. Even the timing of the wedding. Everything had been built around the idea of us. Now there was only me again. And strangely, that didn't feel empty. It felt free. "We move on," I said. My friend raised an eyebrow. "That's it?" "That's it." He shook his head with a laugh. "You're terrifyingly calm, you know that?" Maybe he was right. But deep down, I understood something they didn't. Some endings don't need revenge. They just need distance. Because once you walk far enough away, the people who hurt you eventually face the consequences of their own choices. Not because you forced it, but because life has a way of balancing things on its own. I looked back once at the bright lights of the hotel. Somewhere inside that building, the wedding that had taken years to prepare had completely collapsed. And for the first time since I met Jasmine 5 years ago, I felt absolutely certain about something. My story with her was truly over. Or at least, that was what I believed at the time. I had no idea that the next time I saw Jasmine again, her life would already be falling apart. For a moment the entire living room went silent. Aaron's drunken eyes widened as if he had just heard the most beautiful words in the world. 5 million, he repeated, his voice suddenly sober. Even Luis, who had been leaning lazily against the table, straightened instantly. "Brother-in-law, are you serious?" Their greed was almost impossible to hide. I calmly loosened the cuff of my shirt and nodded slightly. "Of course." Aaron's face broke into a wide grin, the kind that tried too hard to look friendly. "See? I told you our son-in-law is a reasonable man." He slapped his thigh loudly and laughed. Family should always solve problems peacefully. Luis was already grinning from ear to ear, clearly calculating something in his head. Only Jasmine remained silent. She stood near the window, her head lowered, her thin fingers gripping the edge of the curtain. She didn't look relieved. She didn't look happy either. She simply looked exhausted. Aaron suddenly remembered something and squinted at me suspiciously. "Hold on," he said. "You said after the child is born?" "Yes." I met his gaze calmly. "After the baby is born, I'll pay the 5 million. Luis frowned. "Why not now?" I smiled faintly. "Because the money is for the child." Aaron waved his hand impatiently. "That's the same thing." "Not exactly. My tone remained gentle. If the child is mine, the money naturally belongs to my family. The word family hung in the air for a moment. Aaron seemed to think about it. Eventually he shrugged. Fine. What difference does a few months make? To him, money was already guaranteed. That was enough. He opened another bottle of beer and laughed loudly. See, daughter? Didn't I say your man would come around? Jasmine still didn't speak. Her eyes finally lifted toward me. For a brief moment, something complicated flashed through her gaze. Shame, regret, and something that looked like quiet despair. But I simply looked away. Luis, however, wasn't finished. Brother-in-law, he said with a grin, since we're family again, I might as well move in for a while. My job situation hasn't been great lately. Aaron nodded enthusiastically. Yes, yes. A family should live together. I said nothing. Instead, I walked toward the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The villa that used to feel peaceful now felt strangely unfamiliar. Beer cans on the floor. Takeout boxes on the table. The air smelled of alcohol and cheap cigarettes. It looked more like a messy dormitory than the home I had carefully built over the years. Behind me, Aaron continued talking loudly. Once the child is born, we'll hold another wedding. A big one this time. Luis laughed. Yeah, brother-in-law is rich anyway. Their voices blended together like buzzing flies. I slowly drank the water in my glass. No anger. No frustration. Just calm. Because none of this mattered. After all, the child in Jasmine's belly had been conceived 4 months ago. And 4 months ago? Our wedding hadn't even taken place yet. The moment I said that, Jasmine's expression completely collapsed. Berlin, she repeated hoarsely. Rainwater slid down her hair and soaked through the thin fabric of her dress. Her shoulders trembled slightly, though I couldn't tell whether it was from the cold or from something else. You still think the child is his? She asked. I didn't answer immediately. The street was nearly empty because of the heavy rain. Water rushed along the curb while the city lights reflected in the wet pavement. Jasmine suddenly laughed weakly. So that's how you see me now. Her voice sounded tired, almost hollow. Philip, do you really believe I would carry someone else's child and come back to beg you? I looked at her quietly. In this situation, I said calmly, belief doesn't change anything. Her fingers slowly loosened from my sleeve. Then what would, she whispered. Proof. The word hung between us. Jasmine froze for a moment. A test, I added. Her eyes widened slightly. You want a paternity test? Yes. The rain continued pouring down around us. For several seconds she simply stared at me, as if trying to understand how the man who once trusted her without question had become this distant. Finally she nodded slowly. Fine. Her voice was soft but steady. We'll do it. Then she looked up at me again. But before that, can you answer one question? I waited. Her lips trembled slightly. If the child really is yours, would you still hate me like this? For the first time that night, I didn't answer right away. The sound of rain filled the silence. After a long pause, I spoke. I don't hate you. Jasmine looked stunned. Because my tone was completely calm. Hate means there's still emotion left, I continued quietly. And right now, I glanced at the rain falling beyond the edge of the roof. I'm just tired. Her eyes turned red again. But this time she didn't cry. She simply stood there for a moment, then slowly stepped back into the rain. Philip, she said softly. Yes? If the test proves the baby is yours, she hesitated before finishing the sentence. I won't ask you to forgive me. Another pause. I'll just ask you not to abandon your child. I watched her silently. Then I opened my umbrella and handed it to her. You should go home. She didn't take it at first. But eventually, she accepted it with trembling hands. Good night, she whispered. Without waiting for a reply, Jasmine turned and walked away into the rain. I stood there under the eaves for a long time. The rain kept falling. And for some reason, the headache I used to get every winter night slowly returned. 3 years ago. That was when everything truly ended. And everything else had only been an illusion I created to survive the truth. The room was silent except for the faint clink of handcuffs. Rose, who had pretended to be Jasmine for 3 years, sat motionless on the floor, her face completely drained of color. The police stood beside her, waiting. One of them looked toward me. Mr. Philip, are you certain? I nodded slowly. I am. For a long moment, Rose didn't move. Then she finally lifted her head and looked at me. The expression in her eyes was complicated, fear, despair, and something that looked strangely like relief. So you remembered, she said quietly. Yes. My voice was calm. But not all at once. Fragments had started returning to me months ago. At first it was just strange details. Jasmine's handwriting looked slightly different. Her favorite foods had changed. Even the way she laughed sometimes felt unfamiliar. Back then I thought it was because of the strain in our relationship. Until one day a memory surfaced. A rainy night. A sharp scream. The sound of metal twisting. And the image of Jasmine's lifeless body in the passenger seat. Rose let out a small, broken laugh. "I tried so hard," she whispered. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched her face. "For 3 whole years, I lived as her." The officers exchanged glances but remained silent. I looked at her steadily. "Why?" Rose lowered her gaze. "Because she asked me to." The answer surprised even the police. Rose continued slowly, her voice unsteady. "That night, the accident happened so suddenly. The truck lost control. When we crashed, she was already badly injured. Her breathing became uneven. She knew she wouldn't survive. I felt my chest tighten slightly, but I didn't interrupt. She grabbed my hand and begged me," Rose whispered. "She said you loved her too much. She said if you lost her, you wouldn't be able to live normally." A tear slid down her cheek. "So she asked me to take her place." The room fell completely silent. Rose laughed bitterly. "I thought it was insane. But she kept begging me. And I couldn't refuse her." She looked up at me again. "So I became her." For 3 years, she had worn Jasmine's clothes, spoken in Jasmine's voice, and lived inside the life that was never hers. "At first," she said softly, "I only planned to stay for a few months. But you were so kind to me." Her eyes reddened. "So gentle. So patient. And every time you looked at me like that, I felt like a thief." My hands slowly clenched at my sides. "Then why poison me tonight?" one of the officers asked. Rose gave a faint smile. "Because he finally remembered." Her eyes met mine again. And once the truth returned, my lie couldn't continue. She looked down at her belly. "The baby isn't his," she said quietly. "It never was." The police quickly wrote something down. Rose's voice grew softer. "I was going to disappear after tonight. The poison wouldn't kill him," she added quickly. "It would only make him lose consciousness for a few hours. By the time he woke up, I would already be gone." She lifted her head one last time. "Philip," she said gently. I didn't answer. Her lips trembled slightly. "I'm sorry. For stealing 3 years of your life." I looked at her silently. But in my mind, another face appeared. The real Jasmine. Laughing under the morning sun outside a small convenience store. The girl with dimples who once shyly said, "Thank you." After a long moment, I finally spoke. "You didn't steal those years." Everyone looked at me. I continued quietly. "They belonged to her. 3 years ago. The woman I loved had already died. And yet, through someone else's desperate lie, she had remained in my life just a little longer." Rose lowered her eyes. For a moment she said nothing, as if the last bit of strength in her body had drained away. "I remember," she said quietly. Her fingers tightened slightly around the cup of water. "That month? I was very angry with you." She forced a faint smile. "You were always busy with work. Flying here, flying there. I kept thinking that if my sister were still alive, you wouldn't have ignored her like that." Her voice trembled slightly. "But the truth is, she would have understood you better than I ever did." I didn't respond. The small interview room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. After a long pause, Rose finally looked up at me again. "You knew the child wasn't yours," she said slowly. "Then why did you say you would take responsibility?" Her eyes searched my face, as if trying to find an answer that would make sense of everything. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Because I needed time." "Time," she repeated. "To confirm what I had begun to suspect." I met her gaze calmly. "When my memories started returning, too many things didn't add up. Your behavior. Your family's sudden greed. And the way you panicked whenever I mentioned the past." Rose laughed weakly. "So you played along?" "Yes." Her shoulders slumped slightly. "I thought, maybe you still cared a little." I shook my head slowly. "That had nothing to do with it." She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, the faint bitterness in her gaze had disappeared. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. "About what?" "About Jasmine." The name lingered in the room like a ghost. For the first time since the conversation began, I hesitated. 3 years. For 3 years I had lived with a lie. But those memories, the laughter, the quiet dinners, the long walks, still existed in my mind. Even if the person beside me during those moments had never truly been her. "I'll visit her," I said finally. Rose nodded slowly. "That's good." A faint smile appeared on her lips. "She used to say that if anything ever happened to her, you should keep living properly." Her voice grew softer. "She worried about you more than anyone." Silence returned. After a moment, Rose looked down at her stomach again. The child belongs to Berlin. Her tone carried no emotion now. He doesn't know yet. That's your problem to deal with, I replied calmly. I know. She placed both hands gently over her belly. For what it's worth. I never planned to keep the baby at first. I raised an eyebrow slightly. But after a while, she continued quietly, I realized this might be the only thing in my life that truly belongs to me. The officers outside the room knocked lightly on the door. Our time was nearly over. Rose stood up slowly. When she reached the door, she suddenly stopped and turned back. Philip. Yes? Do you hate me? I looked at her for a long moment. Then I shook my head. No. Her eyes trembled slightly. But I won't forgive you either. The faint smile on her face didn't disappear. That's fair. She nodded once. Then she turned and walked out of the room. I remained seated there for a while after the door closed. 3 years of lies had finally come to an end. Outside the police station, the evening sky was turning dark. For the first time in a long time, my memories of Jasmine were finally clear again. Rose's lips trembled as she looked down at the thermos in her hands. I thought I could trick you, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the faint hum of the rain outside the villa. I didn't answer immediately. I simply let the silence stretch, letting the weight of her words settle. You knew, she continued, lifting her gaze hesitantly. From the very first day I brought the soup, you knew I wasn't acting alone. I nodded slightly, calm and even. Yes. I knew. Her shoulders sagged as if a mountain of tension had finally slipped off her back. Tears glistened in her eyes, but this time there was no pleading, no desperation, only the quiet resignation of someone who had run out of masks. I didn't think you'd notice, she admitted. I thought, maybe I could keep you distracted long enough to finish what my family planned. To secure everything before the truth came out. I tilted my head, regarding her silently. But you underestimated me, I said gently. I was never distracted. I was always watching. A shiver ran through her body, and she lowered the thermos onto the counter. Her hands trembled slightly, but she held herself upright, as if refusing to collapse entirely. I only wanted to survive, she said softly. And I never wanted to hurt him. You didn't, I replied evenly. You only hurt yourself. Her lips quivered, a faint, bitter smile forming. All these months, I've been serving you soup, pretending to care, while my family, using me as a pawn. And you let me think it was about me. I let you think what you needed to think, I said. My gaze didn't waver. Because you were never truly my target. Your family was. Rose's breathing hitched. She finally looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time fully. Then, everything I did, the soup, the lies, it was useless? I shook my head slightly. No. You revealed the truth. And now I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Her hands clutched her belly instinctively, a protective gesture that betrayed the frailty behind her brave front. I don't know what comes next, she admitted. Neither do I said softly. But one thing is clear. From now on, I decide what stays in my life and what doesn't. A long pause stretched between us. The rain outside drummed against the windows, steady and unyielding. Rose finally exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from her body. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't cry out. She simply lowered her gaze, the weight of her guilt and relief coexisting in silence. You really weren't fooled at all, she said quietly. No, I replied. Not for a second. Her half-smile faltered, but it was the first genuine one she had shown in months, a mixture of surrender, shame, and a strange sense of closure. I turned away, letting her words hang in the air as I walked toward the door. The villa was quiet now, save for the rain. Behind me, Rose whispered softly, almost to herself, I only wanted to protect her, I didn't look back. Because I already knew. And for the first time in years, everything finally made sense. I stood there for a long moment, the cold wind cutting through my coat, carrying the quiet stillness of winter across the cemetery. The snowflakes fell gently, soft and deliberate, landing on Jasmine's gravestone like tiny reminders of the time I had lost. Jasmine, I whispered, voice low, almost reverent. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember. You must have waited, for all those years. I traced a finger over the engraved letters, feeling the chill seep into my bones. I was a coward. I let myself believe that you hadn't truly left me. I let others manipulate my life while I hid behind that illusion. The bouquet of peony roses trembled slightly in my grip, their painted petals vivid against the gray snow. I placed them carefully at the base of her tombstone, arranging them as if I could somehow reach across time to the moments we lost. I remember Regina, I continued softly, almost to myself. Her help finally brought the memories back, though it cost more than I ever imagined. And yet, even with the truth resurfacing, the scene of your accident, so vivid, so raw, remains etched in my mind. It was like waking from a dream where I had been blind for years. A gust of cold wind swept through, ruffling my hair, and I held my coat tighter around me. My eyes lingered on her photograph, the warmth of her smile, bright and alive as if she were still laughing somewhere just beyond my reach. Did I ever fall in love with Rose during those years? I murmured, almost questioning the silence itself. Maybe, but when a life is built on lies, what meaning can that love truly hold? What is real when every memory has been stolen or rewritten? Snowflakes melted slowly in my palm, the wet chill grounding me to the present. Aside from the wind, there was only silence, sharp, absolute, and cleansing. After what felt like an eternity, I straightened. Brushing the snow from my shoulders, I gently cleared the flakes from her tombstone. If one day we are drenched in snow together, I said softly, a faint smile tugging at my lips, then this life, this long, winding, broken life, will finally count as growing old side by side. I took a last look at her photograph, at the radiance frozen in that single moment. Thank you, Jasmine, I whispered. For everything. I will carry you with me, and I too will continue moving forward. With a steady breath, I turned away, the cold wind at my back, the first snowfall of winter drifting around me like a quiet benediction. The past was settled. The future was mine to claim.